What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 4040 Vision Podcast. I am your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by Audley Stephenson, the Vice President of Marketing and Promotions for the Basketball Super League in Canada. How's everything going today?
I am great, Khaled. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you doing this. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for agreeing to come on the show. So we're going to talk about your journey, your career today. We're going to talk about basketball in Canada, which has obviously grown in popularity over the last 20, 30 years or so. So let's take it back. I creeped on your LinkedIn a little bit before the call, and I saw that before the Basketball Super League, you
Every good
were
host does. Every good host does a bit of
right.
creeping.
Got to do my research. You were with the National Basketball League of Canada, which is a minor league, right? I believe in Canada. How did you get involved with them? You've been there or you were there for, I think, 12 years?
Yeah. So let me one slight correction introduction. You reference the Basketball Super League is in Canada. It's actually based in Canada and U.S. and I'll
Okay.
explain a bit further on. But so my history. And it's funny. I was literally having this conversation recently with someone about just kind of what my journey looked like, and I think it's important for every so often all of us should kind of take a moment and stop and look back, because you'll start to realize like, oh, I did this and how all the dots connected, and I'll explain why I mean by that. So, in 2008, I had me and a buddy of mine decided that we were going to launch a podcast all the way in 2008. Back then, podcasts weren't heard of. Now every day they're like a business card. Everyone's got one, which is great. But back then it was a totally different landscape. And we stumbled upon this platform. Now at the time, if you think about it, again, 2008, the Raptors hadn't won any championships yet. Vince Carter wasn't on the scene yet. Like it wasn't. We were just kind of sort of getting into this basketball, but still, I mean, it was 2007 actually.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, we said let's go. My friend, he's a little short Portuguese guy. I'm a big bald black guy, and all of a sudden we're talking basketball in a hockey country, and so we were almost a novelty because of how we delivered it. It was a lot of fun. It wasn't, we didn't get too serious about it. So it was just a really laid back and cool show. In 2011, so by this time we've been going for 3 years. We had lots of guests. We had lots of basketball guests that come on. We were actually the first. Well, I say first, but really the second. But I like to say first because it sounds better. We were the first podcast that was credentialed by the Raptors. So we actually had locker room access at that time, which again was a big deal.
Yeah, that's a huge deal.
And so we're doing our thing. Life was good. And then in 2011, the NBA had their lockout year. Now, it's hard to imagine a world without content. But once upon a time, before TikTok, before Instagram, just on the early stage of Twitter, if there wasn't content being put out there, there wasn't a whole lot available. Like it was just we got just what people were putting out in that moment. If that wasn't happening, there was no content. And so we were at a stage, we were at a point where like, okay, and it was really just Facebook and Twitter. And it's hard to imagine a world with only Facebook and Twitter. Really, that's all there was in terms of mainstream platform for social media. And you weren't having, and players weren't really engaging like they are now. Like now, you got a lockout. You can know what people had for breakfast. You'll color the tie, color players' shoelaces are. All that stuff. Back then, that wasn't the case, and so we wanted to still do stuff, but I'm not sure what direction to go into because there was no basketball. NBA was locked out. That happened to be the same year, coincidentally, the NBL Canada started on the scene. They started the NBA's lockout year. And NBL Canada was a Canadian basketball league, pro basketball league. The talent level very, very comparable to that of the D League back then, but G League now.
Sure.
And in fact, there were a lot of players that left the D League or G League and joined NBL Canada. It was a league that was appealing to a lot of players who, particularly those from the States, because you didn't have to go overseas. So again, if you think about it, if you're a top level D1 athlete and you've got the wherewithal to play pro, but you're not quite NBA level, your next option in most cases is going overseas. Well,
somewhere in Europe or Middle East, yeah.
Right. And so now all of a sudden, you don't have to go overseas. You can stay in North America. Your family and friends can come and see a play, as typically within driving distance, just coming to Canada. And so that was kind of how the league got started. It had 6 teams in its first year. It grew up to as many as 10 rather, and the league was flourishing and doing well. When I recognized that there was this new league, I came with the opportunity. I came with the mindset of, hey, I can create content for you because I'm an NBA credentialed podcaster. So why don't I do what I'm doing over there for you guys? And I had nothing to do anyways, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I pitched it to them. They liked it. I jumped on board, and that's what I did in the first couple of years. Is I made content. But as time had gone on, I got deeper involved. I was appointed to a communications role. Then I got a promotion to another role where I handle content across the league. And then I was doing some operation stuff. And then in 2017, I was appointed to the league commissioner. And I know I've sort of leapfrog a lot of stuff in between. But essentially, it was a case where I came on board as a volunteer because that's what I was my first 2 years. I was podcasting for free because, one, I wanted to keep busy, and 2, I liked it. And it was basketball, so it worked for me. But as I got there, I started to recognize, hey, this is kind of a cool thing we got going on. And I was able to find ways where I could be a value of service to the league. And it went on to the point where they were like, now we need you to be a part of things. Because, I was quite frankly Mr. Do-It-All. I had the Swiss Army knife thing going on where I was covering all their bases for them and helping them out. So in 2017, I've been actually go a year prior. A year prior, a gentleman by the name of David Magley, he had been the commissioner for 2 years with NBL Canada. And in his second year, and he was always a really good friend of mine, and in his second year, he and I worked even closer together. And as the story goes, he was at the end of his contract here, and I was originally from the U.S. Originally, he came to Canada to work in this role. And as the story goes, at the end of his contract year, he was negotiating with the board, and he had said, I'm really thinking I want to go back home with my family. And this job of commissioner, it's huge. There's a lot to it. And, I think it'll be tough for me to stay. So the board had said to him, well, what would you need to stay? Like, what do we have to do to keep you? And one of the things that they identified is, but if I had a deputy commissioner worked alongside with me that helped me, sure, I could put stuff on, it would make a big difference. They went off and said, okay, let's think about it. And part of the thinking about it is when they approached me and said, hey, you would make a really good candidate considering how much you've done for the league, what you've been a part of, your longevity. What do you think? And after a bit of mulling it over, I said, sure, why not? Let's do it. I'll take this job of commissioner. Now, deputy commissioner. Now, in this time, while I was deliberating, Dave Magley had made up his mind. And the pull and the draw to be closer to home with his family was just too strong. So he left. Sure. And so I went from being deputy commissioner to commissioner overnight because he had made the decision to leave, and I took over the reins. And I did that, like I said, in 2017 up until our COVID lockout year, which we all were impacted. And going into COVID, as I mentioned, we had 10 teams. When we came on the other side of COVID, we had 4. And, wow, we just couldn't sustain ourselves. Incidentally, David Magley, again, who had always been my good friend, when he went to the U.S., he decided to start his own basketball league in the States. And it was called the TBL. And it was a league that grew very, very quickly. They had almost 50 teams across the U.S., was flourishing very, very well. And when we came out the other side of COVID with our only 4 teams, I reached out to Dave and I said, hey, what do you think of the idea if we had some of our U.S. teams come up here to play our teams in Canada? Because these 4 teams only play each other so many times before they get sick of playing each other, right? Yeah. And so he thought about it. He saw that we thought it was a good idea. We figured out some ways to make it work. And we did that for 2 years. And at the end of the second year, we saw a lot of positives to it. We saw things working really, really well. And so we decided to take it a step further. And instead of continuing with these 2 leagues playing, games sporadically against each other, we decided to take, because although his league had close to 50 teams, there were only a handful that would play at NBL Canada's level, right? In terms of size of team,
Talent
the
and all that.
makeup,
Yeah.
where the talent, all that kind of stuff. So essentially, what we decided is to take the best of his league, take the 4 remaining teams, and come together to create the Basketball Super League. And
Okay.
so that's where that league was formed. So now we've got teams that play both U.S. and in Canada. And for that, and it was not when that league was formed. I took on the role of VP of marketing and promotions
Yeah.
and a
I
bunch of other
definitely
stuff
want to.
under this time.
Yeah, I definitely want to get into the the differences between the two leagues and how
Yeah.
things are going in the new league. But when you were running, the NBL Canada, what what was your day to day like as a commissioner? I'm always curious. I mean, what a
Yeah.
commissioner does in a pro sports league. Are you doing everything? Is it marketing, PR, player disputes, labor disputes, all that stuff? What's your day to day like at that point?
I think you just nailed it all. It's literally every day under the sun. No 2 days are the exact same. Depending on the infrastructure makeup of the league, determines how much is actually on my plate. And so yes, while I had some support, there were still some things that I was directly involved with. Certainly from an operations standpoint on the data. So let's say like a game day as an example, right? We've got promotional stuff that we want to get out to promote our games. As commissioner, if I'm on site, you're doing a lot. You're doing a lot of meeting with a lot of stakeholders. The teams that we report. I essentially I report to the board of the league, and the board reports is supported by its teams. And so, relationship manager is probably the strongest skill that you need to have. Being able to work with people, being able to negotiate with people. Having to tell a player that their top, tell a team rather that their top player is going to be suspended for X number of games can be a very difficult conversation or an easier conversation depending on the nature of the relationship. And so, it's one of these roles where you got to play nice with everybody, so to speak, because collectively, regardless how I feel about you or they feel about me, you're going to need people to get the job done. So as a result of that, the role itself can be very isolating because you've got in some instances especially when it's time to make a decision. Let's say you're suspending someone, for example. You've got to stand by firm by that decision, and not everyone's going to like you. Not everyone's going to think you're making the right decision. Everyone's got an opinion
Hmm.
on every decision that you make. I also was responsible for the referees, so I oversaw the referees, and we looked at whether it's training or development or recruitment. I was a part of that process. Most times, when a whistle is blown, half the arena likes a call, and the other half doesn't.
Sure.
Right? And so you magnify that to it's a game deciding whistle that's blown, right? Half are gonna like it and half aren't. Well, chances are the half that don't like it, you're on the phone with them the next day or that day, and you're reviewing footage, you're doing all the things to ensure that the integrity of the game was maintained. And that's a process, right? So there are a bunch of things. Um, in addition to trying to bring in new sponsors, new partners, just a wide array.
Sure.
It's multifaceted for sure. But I would say, by it's the most important skill is your ability to work with people, because if that's not there, it'll
Hmm.
be tough for you.
For sure. And you started to touch on this a little bit. So you talked about the NBL Canada, how it was, I believe, 8 teams at its peak, where they're only playing in Canada, playing each other. I'm sure there's a playoff system and all that. So now with the Basketball Super League, with the teams in Canada and the teams in the U.S., what's that structure like, and what have been some of the challenges in dealing with playing in two countries?
Super, super excited about the Basketball Super League can offer. The name in itself suggests, this is a super league, and we're really, really proud of that. A lot of work to get us to this point because of the fact that you're now looking at Canada, the U.S., primarily under the NBL Canada model. We played under FIBA rules. Under the Basketball Super League, we moved to more an NBA game. And I think largely due to the fact that a lot more people recognize the NBA game, they understand it. you're playing under FIBA, goaltending is very different, right? In the two
That's the
leagues, right?
biggest culture
And
shock in
so, and
watching
that's the one
FIBA
people that
or,
can't.
yeah.
Absolutely. What do you mean? Wait, he's not allowed to touch the ball off the rim. Absolutely, you can in FIBA, right? Um, and I mean, the game. There's some slight nuances, but by and large, the games themselves are comparable. Um, but with any new venture, you ask about challenges. With any new ventures, it's just growing it, right? Like getting off the ground. Getting people to be confident in your product. Being consistent. Having to develop new systems. We had. When you have a bunch of teams from one league and a bunch of teams from another come together to form a league, you have to be able to remind people that what you did before isn't what you're doing now. And for some of these leagues that were in with NBL Canada from 2011, you're talking about 13, 14 years that this is how they did things. And now you're saying, no, 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 we're not changing and different. So there's certainly some growing pains with that. We've only just completed year one, our inaugural season. In fact, we have some meetings in Vegas coming up over the course of the next couple of days. We'll look to do some planning, look to do some, tweaking, if you will, looking at, what things did we like, what didn't we like, what can we improve on, what can we do better. So we're in the midst of doing that now. And, I anticipate that, we will, move into year number two as a sophomore season, and elevate our product and our brand. We're very much about growth, and so if you think about it, you can have anywhere to 30 to 40 teams between Canada and the U.S. And that's when
Wow.
it gets really, really exciting for us. And so, yeah, we're happy with the prospects of the league. I think that it has the potential to do very, very well, and we're going to just build on our successes.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated by maybe the little things when it comes to running like a not maybe not even a minor league, but like a lower level league than NBA, the NFL. I feel like, for example, if the NBA runs into a weather delay or some kind of issue, they can just kind of throw money at the problem, right? They'll just charter another flight, they'll do whatever. I know, with the smaller leagues, we interviewed someone from the USL, which is a minor league soccer league here in the US, and they'd have to be so creative with the way they spend their money and all that stuff. So, how are you guys able to stay? I assume you're trying to stay lean in terms of costs and everything like that while you're in your growth phase. So, how are some of the ways that you adapt to challenges like scheduling or delays or things that you can't really account for?
Yeah, I know. I mean, you touch on traveling. I smile on the inside because, we've had teams across the Maritimes, and winters in the Maritimes is something different, right? We've got a team in Newfoundland, and the number of we almost account and build in potential snow games like that. We just know that are going to happen or inevitable. But we do try to be creative, particularly around our scheduling. We want to make sure we buffer enough time for traveling to ensure that, if there is some sort of weather condition, that we've accounted for that. Our teams do get very creative. I think for the most part, regardless of what sports league you're in, your two biggest costs will be your players' costs and your transportation. Those are gonna be the two by far. And they look to have like local guys as an example, right? When you recruit a local player on your team, housing isn't an issue any longer, transportation isn't an issue any longer, but there's also some goodwill by knowing a local hometown product is playing on the team. So things of that nature. Like I said, mentioned putting in buffering time. There's just some things that are out of our control. In most of our arenas, we're not the first tenant, which means hockey will be first. For example, in here in Ontario, we have the OHL, the Ontario Hockey League. So we have to. So when it comes to playoff time, we have to wait till they select their playoff dates so we can get the extra, right? And oftentimes they're scooping up the weekend days, whichever one wants the weekend dates, right? So those are sorts of things that you just got to work around. They're a reality of the business, and there's some things you have control over. Those sorts of things you really don't. So you just got to just make it work the best you can. I think for us, what we've continually found is the strength of all of our teams has always been their connection to community and involvement in the community. So we're not just in their towns to play basketball, we're a part of their town playing basketball, if you get what I mean.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Yeah. So you mentioned that at the top that the NBL Canada, the level of play was comparable to the D League or the G League as we know it now. You also mentioned that you try to recruit local players, or hometown kids for each of these teams. So, in general, how do you attract talent? How do you get guys to come play, either in Canada or one of the teams in the U.S.?
I'll tell you, when you're doing something for a while, so 10, 12 years, word kind of spreads. So, we focus on ensuring that we run the league the right way. Guys get paid on time, their housing is appropriate, they're taken care of. I think if you do those things, the word just spreads. And where the word spreads is between players. Players tell other players to other players, hey, this is an opportunity in Canada. And that's been our number one marketing tool. We also take advantage of combines. And so we run summer combines as a way of giving opportunities for players who are maybe early in their career a chance to be seen. Most of our combines, if not all of them, the teams that are interested in players are actually there. So it's not just come and play and we'll get back to you. Teams are actually there, and I've seen numerous players who were approached right at these combines by teams, and they're offering them a contract to come play. Right, so those are just a couple of the ways that happen. But I will tell you, it really after a while, you do a good enough job, your reputation precedes itself, and you don't have to work as hard to get players, to get talent. We have certainly, and have always had a good relationship with agents as the example. And
Mm-hmm.
the agent pool that have connected to a lot of these players are huge. And so that's a potential another opportunity to tap into to be able to bring talent into our league.
Yeah, and I'm sure as you mentioned earlier at the top that some guys will probably prefer to stay in Canada where they're a little bit closer to home. I'm
Yep.
sure you also mentioned that guys are getting paid on time, which may sound funny to somebody that's an NBA fan, but
Yep.
I've read stories of guys going to play in Turkey or Russia where there's a language barrier and there's also they're just not sometimes they're just not getting paid
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
whatever reason the
I've
check doesn't show up.
I've lost track of the number of stories I've heard where players they're playing somewhere and they're told next week, next week, next week, and they never get paid, right? And they've just been there for 2 months, and the situation isn't good. Most if not all these players have family to support, right? And they got people back home that are depending on them, and so and this is their livelihood, this is their job, and so getting paid is extremely important, and that's why we focus to make sure that happens on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's probably where that word of mouth comes in, where that stability, players talk to other players, whether they're working out together or former teammates or college buddies, whatever it is, the word gets around that it's a stable place. You're going to get your paycheck on time and be able to play high level basketball and display your talent. So now that you've transitioned from the commissioner of NBL Canada to the VP of marketing with the Basketball Super League, I'm sure the relationship aspect hasn't changed too much, but how has the rest of the stuff, the other day-to-day activities that you're involved in?
Well, it's funny, the title that you call yourself, I don't think it ever truly encapsulates what you do. With me having so much experience and insight into our teams, the work I did in year one was definitely wasn't limited to just promotion and marketing and getting the word out. I was doing a lot behind the scenes stuff just because I had done it for so as long as I did. In a lot of ways, I felt like I was a consultant, quite frankly, right? Be able to say, hey, let's do this, let's do that. I certainly helped that David Magley, again, we have a good relationship. I've always had a good relationship. And so he trusted me and still does. And so being able to give him some perspective or insight on what I've done or what I've seen or what could work better, he was always open to hearing that. But it actually, it's funny. I was heavily involved up front and really helping, especially from the scheduling standpoint, getting things in order and helping on that regard. And then, and then as we moved on, the behind the scenes stuff I started to do less and less of. And by the time we got to the end of the season, I was just, really just focused on communication stuff. And I remember at the end of the year, I was like, that was a pretty easy year. It was no cake, it was a piece of cake, no sweat, right? Because I wasn't doing commissioner stuff. I wasn't, and it is demanding, right? It's a lot. It's just like it's ongoing, it's constant. You are seen as a representative of the league, so every player in the league will want to reach out to you with their concerns, valid or not, is you still have to give the ear to listen. Every team, every staff member, every team, every official, every league staff, you're at their disposal, so to speak. And so to not have to do any of that, I felt like I got years back, and I was like, wow, this is fantastic. I feel like I was on vacation. Although I worked, right? I felt like I was on vacation.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think about all the other commissioners in major sports, and they're the figureheads, and they get a ton of criticism. I mean, Roger Goodell gets booed every time he steps up to the podium. If there's a suspension that people don't agree with, like you mentioned, the first person to get blamed is the commissioner, even if he didn't make the decision. If a referee makes a bad call, like you said, it's not just half the stadium, it's half the people on social media, it's millions of people watching or whatever. They're not too happy with the commissioner. And of course the blame always rolls up from,
Yeah,
official to whatever up to the commissioner level. So
yeah.
that makes a lot of sense why you probably felt some weight off your shoulders. Uh, so you're a basketball lifer in Canada, and I've always been fascinated by the kind of like the way people watch basketball in Canada, the way they appreciate it. Because, like you said, it's a hockey country, and basketball is relatively new. I think, well, I mean, I know they've had teams for a long time in Toronto and other places, but in the NBA, it's relatively new. So, what's the state of basketball in Canada today versus where it was, 30 years ago when the Grizzlies and the Raptors first came to the country?
Yeah, it's never been hotter. I mean, it continues to grow and grow and grow. You've got. You look at all the Canadians in the NBA. In fact, the team, the national team going to the Olympics is largely all NBA players. And you look at the roster from top to bottom, and so those things bode well for the growth of the sport. Leagues like formerly NBL Canada, NBSL, are making huge dents into the landscape as well. Um, the growth of the game, of any major sports, it really starts at the grassroots level, right? And you're seeing there's lots of clubs. Ontario basketball, Canada basketball is doing a phenomenal job in really promoting the sport, and that's where you're seeing the growth. And so, I've always been big on basketball's always been my thing. It's nice to see the continued growth and development of the sport, and it really, truly, truly is developing and growing at leaps and bounds. And so it's I'm not quite. I don't think we're at the point to say that Canada is a basketball country, but certainly isn't far behind hockey these days.
No, that's a good segue to the next question is where does basketball rank in the, Canadian sports hierarchy with hockey probably taking the top 10 spots, but what comes after that?
Yeah, I think from an interest level, because again, I go back to the point of being at the grassroots level. It's very easy to get into. Like, soccer is another big sport here in Canada that's getting a lot of love, and it's an international sport. But I'm telling you,
And
back.
Canada has its own professional soccer league, right? It's the Canadian Premier League, I believe it's
Yeah,
called.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, so it is definitely growing in leaps and bounds as well, and you're seeing the development, and you're seeing the growth. Basketball definitely has its place. It is up there. Maybe I'm biased, right, Khalid, by saying that, but I think it's really, really up there. And I can remember a time, early sort of in the Raptors era where the guy that was calling the game, they call him like on TV. They were also using that for the radio broadcast, so it didn't have its own separate, right? And
Oh wow. Okay.
right. So that's kind of give you an idea that, like, in terms of where it will prioritize, and now it's. I mean, that hasn't happened in a while, but not every game was televised, right? Now they are. Again, Raptors winning a championship 2019 certainly helps with that, right? And really, elevates the game for sure. But I'll tell you, it was on the upward path for a very, very long time, and so it's great to see, and it's great to watch a continued growth.
Yeah, I definitely think even before that title year in 2019, where they finally did it, the years leading up, they would always show the crowds outside the arena in Toronto where there was a home or an away game.
Sure.
I forget I think they called it Jurassic Park,
Jurassic Park. Yep, yep, that's
where
right.
there's, thousands of people there standing out, in the middle of the night watching basketball. and rooting for their team. So I definitely knew that basketball was already a thing before the Raptors won. Maybe it just kind of sealed the deal, made it official. What was Vince Carter's role in all of this? Because I believe there was a 30 for 30 a few years back that talked about how he kind of saved basketball in Canada. And I think before that, the Grizzlies had moved from Vancouver down to Memphis after being established there. So is that overstated with his role there, or did he really save basketball in NBA
I don't
basketball
know.
in Canada?
Yeah, I don't know if "save" was something I would use a word. I understand why people would say that, um, and I get it. But I still believe that the game was going to grow. What Vince Carter did was sort of elevate that and quicken that elevation, if you will. You've got a lot of players. I mentioned NBA players who are on the national team now. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander example. When you talk to these players, or Corey Joseph, or the guy he's been playing on the NBA. He started with the Spurs in his rookie year. These guys talk about Tristan Thompson. They talk about watching Vince growing up. So he definitely had a huge hand in play in the inspiration of those next level of players. Um, many may not recall, but when Steph Curry was a kid, his father Del Curry played for the Toronto Raptors, and so he was also exposed to that Vince
Yeah,
Carter
very
era as
aware.
well at a
Yeah.
very young age, right? And so Vince definitely, without question, deserves a number raised in the rafters. He deserves all the, they should put a statue in front of the building for him, all that good stuff, because his contributions to Canada basketball were huge. Again, I don't know if the save is a word I'd use, but I get why people say that. But absolutely, he was a huge contributor. And what really he was able to do was bring an excitement to the game. And that's what people needed to see, just an excitement. Back then, I used to be. I actually in Vince's second year. I started as I was an usher at the Air Canada Center back then, and so I was
Oh
watching him on
wow,
a nightly. I was watching,
that's
and
awesome.
the crowds would flock to see this guy. And I mean, during warm ups, there'd be lineups just to watch him do warm ups, and he's doing his windmill dunks and doing all the aerial stuff that he's known for, and he just brought an excitement, a flash, that pizzazz to the game that people wanted to see, and he should be commended for all that he did.
Okay, so not quite saved. That's fine because it was already thriving. But I do love the fact that you brought up the inspiration level. I didn't realize that he was such a key figure. I would have thought maybe someone like Steve Nash, but maybe he definitely wasn't as cool as Vince
Oh
Carter was.
yeah,
He wasn't in the, you know,
yeah. I tell you, like guys like Andrew Wiggins, they will talk about what Vince Carter did and how exciting the sport was made because of him here in Canada. And so yeah, he definitely had a role in inspiring the next generation of NBA stars here in Canada.
hmm. And do you feel like Canada has the fan width, the room for another team? I know, as I mentioned, the Grizzlies left Vancouver for Memphis. Do you feel like there's room for another expansion team up in Canada?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about Canada is a big country, the right market, obviously. You talk to many, and many will tell you that it should never have left Vancouver, and I've heard off and on throughout the years bids to bring another team back, right? And
Hmm.
so there's absolutely lots and lots and lots of room. Canada's a big country, and the sport, it's at a place now where I think it would be a good thing.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're banking on that growth of the game and the love for the game and the kind of filling in those spaces between the NBA in between the big part of the country that doesn't have an NBA team. I'm sure there's
That's it.
plenty of BSL teams between all the way to the West Coast.
Yeah, and,
Uh,
and I think if you think about it too, like what it does, it provides, and this is where leagues like the BSL, play a key role in the growth and development of the game. The NBA can't be in every market. Where we thrive, and even from NBL Canada days and now, where we thrive are being in those small communities. So if you are in St. John's, Newfoundland, or Charlottetown, PEI, Prince Edward Island, on a Saturday night, there's only one place to be. there's only one place to be, and that's at the arena checking out basketball, right? Because not only is it a high entertainment value, at the end of the game, the players, you can touch and feel them. You can go and talk to them after the game and shake hands and get a photo and autograph. And that kind of experience, the NBA will never be able to offer to that degree because it's just too big. The superstars are too massive.
Hmm.
But leagues like ours do have the ability to fit that right niche for those markets that can service them.
Yeah, it's the accessibility. You can't beat that. Like you said, the NBA can't be in every city, but you can have high level professional basketball in places where you wouldn't normally find it. And that establishes that love for the game, makes it accessible to the kids and families, and starts at that grassroots, like you
Yes,
said. So,
you got it.
uh, where can people watch the BSL? Where do you guys broadcast?
Yeah, so the league has its own online platform, BSL TV. The best way to connect to that is head over to basketballsuperleague.com. We the season we're in Vegas, this week, and we'll be talking about when ideally we want to start. I think you'll see closer in line with an NBA start in around that time. Last year we started on Boxing Day. That's when we played our first game. This year we're looking to bring it up just a little bit. But yeah, the idea is to again offer another. It's another basketball offering to fans, and again one that they can touch, feel, and get up close to if they wanted to. And so, but to get all those insights, basketballsuperleague.com is a website.
And for our American listeners or viewers, Boxing Day is the day after Christmas, right?
You got it. You got it. Yes, that's
Okay.
right. Boxing Day. Yes, right. I
All
forgot
right.
that. Boxing Day is a
That's all
Canadian
good.
holiday. Yeah.
I will say the only reason I know about that is I'm a big soccer fan, and they always have the big Premier League games on TV on Boxing Day.
There
So
you
that's
go. There you go.
that's the only
Yeah,
reason
yeah.
I know about it.
Thank you. Thank you for the save
Uh,
there.
yeah, and where can people watch your podcast or listen to your podcast and learn more about you and the work that you're doing with the BSL?
Yeah. So very quickly, I'm a multifaceted guy, and I like to have my hands on lots of different things. Aside from my work in the sports world with the BSL, I've actually got a self development motivational podcast called the Audacious Living Podcast. And the idea really is to encourage individuals to live what I call their best life ever. And you do that by being bold, taking risks, taking chances, it's funny when the development of that podcast actually started during COVID. The COVID happened. We all were impacted the same way. We all understand what it did to us. And in my case, we were about to enter into our playoffs, and all of a sudden the plug gets pulled, and we've got nothing. And the playoffs are, as most playoffs are, it's a different animal, it's a different energy, it's an exciting time. So leading up to that anticipation, the playoffs are coming, and all of a sudden there's nothing. And I was looking to fill a gap. I was looking to fill a void. As I'd mentioned before, I had podcasts from 2008. That wasn't anything new to me. So I decided I wanted to do something that was different. I want to do something that mattered to me. And so I started this podcast on being audacious. And really, where the audacious thing came from for me was I took an analysis of my life, and I looked at sort of all my major successes, my wins, whatnot, and everything that I had done. I demonstrated some form of audaciousness. Like it took audacity for me to approach NBL Canada in year one and said, "Here, let me do this for you." But as a result of me doing that, it led to me becoming a commissioner of the league. And so the idea is really to encourage people to tap into their inner audaciousness to make great things happen in their lives. And so that's what I do on the podcast. The website is bestaudaciouslife.com. Myself personally, I'm on all over social media, simply as the Odd Man, THEAUDMAN, not ODD, AUDMAN. And yeah, I'm accessible. Certainly reach out to me, engage. Uh, you know, uh, um, whether it's basketball, whether it's motivational stuff, absolutely, I'd be happy to chat.
Yeah, it was audacious to start a podcast in 2008 when people probably still had to download it directly to their phones or their
Yeah,
iPods. I don't remember any of these other streaming services focusing on podcasts. So you
no,
had the foresight to do that, and then of
thank you.
course you had the audaciousness and foresight to jump on this basketball league and provide them with your services, with your expertise and all that. So
Yeah,
a lot of credit to you for doing that. I
thank you.
really enjoyed this conversation. I'll make sure to share all the links and everything in our episode description.
For
And
sure.
again, I really enjoyed this. Thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to talk to us today.
Khaled, listen, I appreciate that anytime. Thank you for reaching out. Great job and keep it moving, man. I'm a big fan of podcasting. I love it. I think it's a fantastic medium, and it's a growing one, and there's lots of space. It's funny. People, there's all sorts of numbers about the number of podcasts out there, and I'll always say it's never too many because every single podcast has its own unique voice. Khaled isn't on every single podcast. He's on this one, and this is his voice, and that's what people want to hear. And so, yeah, don't, I would never get that discourage you. Keep doing your thing. Whether you have one listener or 100, it matters. Keep it going.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.